The sun was setting behind the maple trees in our backyard, casting long shadows over the wooden fence. I sat on the patio, half absorbed in a book I'd already read 3 times. I wasn't reading for knowledge. I was reading to stay still, to remain anchored in this fragile sense of peace I had somehow found with her. Inside the house, I could hear the faint clinking of dishes. Emily was baking again, apple pie, her favorite, though she claimed she made it for me. The smell was already seeping through the windows, sweet and warm, the kind of scent that wraps itself around your memory and lingers for years. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, and even though she moved a little slower now, there was a grace to her that I'd never seen in anyone else. That was my life, a soft late afternoon, a quiet house, a woman I loved, and a child on the way. For a man like me, who had spent most of his life building walls, not homes, this was a dream I didn't dare believe in. And yet, somehow, I had stumbled into it. I don't remember the exact moment the knock came. It wasn't loud, just 3 polite taps, the kind you might expect from a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. I almost didn't hear it. But Emily did. She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her forehead creased. "Can you get that?" she asked softly. I nodded, closed the book, and stood up. I opened the door to a man I had never seen before, but whose presence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. He was tall, lean, dressed in a simple gray jacket and worn-out jeans. But it was the eyes that did it. Hazel, sharp, searching. The way he looked past me, into the house, like he already knew every corner of it. "Is Emily here?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" I said, instinctively stepping into the doorway. He hesitated, then said, "My name's Jason." I noticed the way her name changed his posture, like it meant something to him, like he had practiced this introduction 1,000 times in the mirror, but it still came out heavy. "I need to talk to her," he said. "It's about the baby." I didn't understand. Not at first. Not fully. The words didn't make sense in the order he said them. Behind me, I heard Emily's footsteps. She had come closer, probably curious about the voice. When she saw him, everything changed. She froze. The towel dropped from her hand onto the floor. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes widened with a kind of recognition I had never seen before. I looked back and forth between them, heart racing in a rhythm I couldn't control. Jason stepped forward slightly, not aggressive, just determined. "I think the baby might be mine," he said. "I've come to find out the truth." And just like that, my world tipped sideways. There's a sound silence makes when it falls, a heavy, suffocating thing. Not the kind of silence that follows an argument, not the one before a kiss. This was the kind that arrives when something sacred has been cracked in half. I turned to look at Emily. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream or laugh or call him a liar. She just stood there, trembling, staring at him like she was staring into the past. And me? I couldn't feel my hands. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. My legs were still, but my insides felt like they were collapsing. I had spent the last 2 years building a life with this woman. I had painted the baby's room myself. I had gone to every ultrasound appointment. I had talked to the bump, told it stories, promised it the world. And now this stranger was standing on my porch, asking to take all of that away. I opened my mouth, but I had no words, just questions. 1,000 of them, all screaming over one another in my head. Jason didn't say anything else. He looked at Emily for a moment longer, then at me. Something in his expression softened, just slightly. "I didn't come here to start a fight," he said. I need to know." Then he turned and walked away. Emily still hadn't moved. I looked at her. Not the way I usually did, not with love or pride or gratitude. This time I looked at her like I was trying to read a language I no longer understood. "Is it true?" I asked. She closed her eyes. That's all she did. Not yes, not no. Just closed her eyes, and I felt something deep inside me split cleanly in two. They say every man remembers the exact moment he meets the woman who changes everything. I used to think that was poetic nonsense, but then I met Emily, It was a rainy Tuesday in Boston, the kind of day when the city feels like it's exhaling smoke. I had ducked into the public library near Copley Square to escape the storm. I wasn't looking for anything, just a dry place, maybe a magazine to flip through. And then I saw her. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor between the philosophy and photography sections. Her boots were soaked through, and she'd wrapped a gray scarf so tightly around her neck it looked like armor. A book lay open across her knees, but she wasn't reading it. She was staring past the shelves, past the walls, like something had broken loose inside her mind and she was chasing it down. She didn't see me watching her, and for a few seconds I just stood there, frozen, not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a raw, unpolished way, but because I recognized something in her. That lostness, that quiet chaos. It mirrored something in me I hadn't admitted was there. I picked up a book I had no interest in and sat 2 shelves away. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought I'd say something clever. Maybe I thought she'd glance over and smile. But I didn't have to wait long. She stood up abruptly, brushing her hair from her eyes, and dropped her book. I leaned down to pick it up just as she did. Our hands touched, and she pulled hers back like I'd burned her. "Sorry," she said, her voice low but warm. "That's my specialty, clumsiness." "It's a hell of a first impression," I replied. I still remember the way she tilted her head at that, like she was trying to decide whether I was worth talking to. After a long pause, she said, "Emily." And that's how it started. We spent the next 3 hours walking around the library, talking about everything from Camus to film photography. She made fun of my love for spreadsheets. I teased her about her obsession with old jazz records. There was an ease between us that felt impossible, like we'd skipped the usual getting-to-know-you awkwardness and stepped right into something deeper. Still, there was a shadow behind her smile, a flicker of something heavy. I didn't ask. I figured if it mattered, she'd tell me. She didn't. Not then. Looking back, I wonder how many moments I dismissed as unimportant. The times she flinched when her phone rang late at night, the way her laughter sometimes ended too suddenly, how on some mornings she'd stare at her coffee like it had betrayed her. One night, about 5 months into dating, I found her on the balcony at 3 a.m. It was late autumn. The air was cold enough to bite. She was barefoot, smoking a cigarette I didn't know she had. Her eyes were puffy, and she wasn't wearing her usual mascara. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and asked, "Are you okay?" She looked at me, startled. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." "You crying?" She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned into my chest and said, "Hold me." I held her. That was enough for me then. I thought I was being kind, giving her space. I didn't realize I was helping her bury something she didn't want to name. It became a rhythm, moments of intimacy, followed by small withdrawals. Some part of me knew she was guarding something, but I was so afraid of losing what we had I never pushed. I mistook her silence for healing. I mistook her distance for independence. When she told me she wanted to move in together, I said yes without hesitation. I thought it meant she had chosen me fully. I thought it meant the ghosts were gone. I was wrong. Jason entered my life long before I knew his name. It started with a shoebox. Emily had asked me not to open it. She kept it on the top shelf of our bedroom closet, taped shut with a single line of red duct tape. "It's just old junk," she said once when I asked. "Things I should have thrown out." I told myself it didn't matter. We all have our boxes, right? But I couldn't help wondering. And after Jason showed up at our door, the box came back to me like a whisper in the dark. After he left that day, after Emily had gone to bed without a word, I went into the closet. I took down the box. My hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for what felt like hours. Then I opened it. Inside were photographs. Some of them were of Emily alone, younger, with her hair dyed jet black, standing on beaches, rooftops, behind microphones. But most of them were of her and a man. Tall, slender, always behind the lens, sometimes just his reflection in her sunglasses. sometimes his hands around her waist, sometimes a blurry shot of them tangled together on a mattress, their bodies half naked, laughing like nothing else existed. And in the corner of many photos, scribbled in tiny ink, was one name: Jason. There it was. I didn't need to read the rest of the letters, though I did. Pages of handwritten notes, poems, some crumpled, some tear-stained, a picture of a small apartment in New York with fairy lights and a record player, and then one envelope sealed tight, labeled, "In case I forget who I used to be." I didn't open that one, not yet. But that night I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. Jason wasn't just some ex. He was a part of her she had never let die, a version of herself she had preserved in a box while trying to build a new life with me. And I was the man who never asked why. It was the quiet that undid me, not the storm of emotions. Those came later. It was the way Emily moved through the house that evening, silent, deliberate, like a ghost rehearsing how to stay unnoticed. She didn't ask what I'd found in the box, and I didn't tell her I'd opened it, but we both knew. I could feel the weight of it hanging between us, thick and invisible, like smoke that never quite clears. We had dinner at the kitchen island, chicken stir-fry. She barely touched hers. I tried to make small talk, asked her if she wanted to paint the nursery walls a different shade of green, but my voice felt foreign in my throat. Her smile was tight, practiced, like she was pulling it from some storage space inside her, dusting it off just for me. I waited until after the dishes were done, until she was in her robe, curled up on the couch with her swollen feet tucked under a blanket. I sat down across from her, turned off the TV with the remote. She didn't protest. That told me more than I was ready to hear. "Emily," I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes wide, expectant. She already knew. "Is the baby mine?" The question didn't feel real until I'd said it out loud. It echoed through the room like I'd knocked a glass from the table and it shattered on the floor. She didn't blink, didn't cry. She just stared at me. Then her lips parted slightly, and I saw it, something slipping in her expression. Not guilt, not fear, something softer, sadder, a kind of surrender. "I don't know," she whispered. It took me a moment to realize I'd stopped breathing. "You don't know?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I want it to be yours," she said. "I really do. But it might not be." A pause. She nodded once, that's all. I felt my chest tighten, as if the room had lost its oxygen. I stood up, walked to the window, and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Outside, the wind was picking up. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, and a siren wailed faintly in the distance. The world was still moving, but I wasn't. "How long have you known?" I asked, my back still to her. "I suspected a few months ago, after the first ultrasound. And you didn't say anything." "What was I supposed to say?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "That I don't know who the father is? That I was with someone else not long before you and I got serious? You would have left. I would have lost everything." "So instead you lied." "I didn't lie," she said. "I just hoped." I turned to face her then, and I saw it, really saw it, the weight she'd been carrying, the silent war she'd been fighting inside herself, and still, a part of me recoiled. "Is it Jason?" I asked. "Is he the one you think—" "I don't know," she cut in. "It could be him, or it could be someone else." That was the moment the floor dropped out from under me. "Someone else?" She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting in her lap. "There was a period," she said slowly, "before I met you, right before, when I wasn't in a good place. I was detached, numb. I didn't care who I was with. I needed to feel something, anything. I wasn't careful. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something through the window and watch it shatter. But instead, I just sat down again, my body too heavy with disbelief to stand any longer." "And you thought building a life with me would fix that?" I asked. "No," she said. I didn't think anything could fix it. But then I met you, and I started to believe I didn't have to be that person anymore. I wanted this baby to be yours, because I wanted that version of myself to be real. I buried my face in my hands. I've been planning a future with you, I said, naming our child, talking to him every night before bed. I've been dreaming of being a father. I know. And it might be some other man's? She didn't answer. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was loud, screaming. A silence filled with everything we didn't say in time. And yet, even in that storm of betrayal, I saw something else in her. She wasn't a liar, not in the malicious sense. She was broken, trying to piece herself back together with fragments of hope and the illusion of a clean slate. She had wanted to believe in our future so badly that she convinced herself the past wouldn't catch up. But it had. It always does. It was 3 days after that conversation when Jason called. Not texted, not emailed. Called. I was outside, raking leaves in the backyard, anything to keep my hands busy, my mind distracted. The baby monitor was clipped to my belt, even though there was no baby yet. Just static, just the sound of waiting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Hey, it's Jason. His voice was deeper than I remembered, calmer than it had any right to be. I didn't respond. I just waited. I know it's not ideal, he said, me reaching out, but I need to say this. I walked to the edge of the yard, away from the house, from her. I didn't want Emily to hear my voice crack. I want a paternity test, he said. I think it's fair. For all of us. Fair. The word hit me like a slap, as if this was a courtroom and we were negotiating terms, as if what we were dealing with wasn't a child, a life, a dream I had been nurturing in quiet moments for almost a year. I exhaled slowly. Emily hasn't agreed to anything, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I know, Jason replied, but I'm not going away, not until I know. I have a right. A right. The man had been gone for over a year. He'd walked out on her. Or she on him, I still didn't know. And now he was back, demanding rights like he'd earned them. Still, there was something in his voice I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just possession. It was pain, and I hated that I understood it. I'll talk to her, I said. Then I hung up before I could hear his thanks. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, I sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. Her face was peaceful, almost innocent. I couldn't reconcile it with the storm churning in my gut. I thought about all the times I'd kissed that stomach, whispered to the child inside. I had believed, down to my bones, that it was mine, that I was speaking to my son. Now those words felt like they had been spoken into a void. When she woke, I told her about Jason's call. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. And what did you say? I told him I'd talk to you. She didn't respond right away, just looked past me, toward the dark window where our reflections hovered like ghosts. I don't want to do this, she said eventually. Why? Because it changes everything, she said. Because once we do this, it's all numbers and probabilities and blood, and I'm scared of what that does to us. What it does to us? I repeated. Emily, we're already undone. You think a test is going to ruin what's left? We're standing in rubble. She flinched. I hated myself for saying it, but I meant every word. I need to know, I said more quietly. I need to know if I've been lying to myself. She looked down at her hands. Her fingers were trembling. Okay, she whispered. Then let's do it. The next day, we made the call. Waiting does something to a person. Not the kind of waiting you do in line at the grocery store or for your name to be called at the dentist's office. That's the easy kind. Predictable? Safe? No. The kind I'm talking about is the kind that claws at your chest in the middle of the night, that keeps you staring at the ceiling long after the world's gone quiet. The kind where the thing you're waiting for could either save you or break you. The kind where time doesn't move forward. It folds in on itself. That's what those days were like after we sent off the samples. Suspended, hollow. Every second held its breath. Emily and I stopped talking about it. We barely talked at all, really. We moved around each other like ghosts in our own home, sharing space, sharing silence, but never really touching. I began sleeping on the couch. She said it was okay. Said she understood. That hurt more than if she'd fought me on it. During the day, I kept busy with meaningless tasks. I deep-cleaned the garage. I rearranged the baby room twice. I fixed a cabinet door that had been squeaking for 2 years. I kept my hands moving because I couldn't let my mind sit still for too long. When it did, it would wander into places I didn't want it to go. What if it's not mine? What if he gets to be the father? What if I've built my life around a lie? And worse, what if I'm the lie? That was the part I couldn't admit out loud. That deep down, some part of me was terrified not that I would lose a child, but that I had never really belonged in the picture to begin with. That I had been a placeholder, a chapter between stories, the safe one. The man she had chosen not because she loved me more, but because she was too tired to keep loving men like Jason. I started rereading old messages between us, emails from our first year, voice notes where she laughed freely, called me her safe harbor. I used to think that was beautiful. Now it sounded like code for the quiet after the storm. Necessary, temporary. There were moments I tried to reach for her. One night, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing lotion into her swollen ankles, and I knelt down beside her, placed my hand gently on her knee. "Em," I said. Just that. Just her name. She looked at me with those impossibly tired eyes and offered a half smile. But there was something gone in her face. Some door had closed, quietly, maybe even mercifully. "Do you think I'm a bad person?" she asked suddenly. I froze. "No," I said. "I think you're a person who made mistakes." She looked away. "I wanted to tell you the truth," she said. "But I also wanted to keep you, and I didn't think I could do both." I didn't know how to respond to that. There was no version of this where I came out clean. If I stayed, I'd always live with the doubt. If I left, I'd always wonder if I gave up too soon. On the 4th day, a package arrived. It wasn't the results. It was from Jason. A small box, no return address, just our names written carefully across the top. Inside were 2 things. A photo of him and Emily, taken years ago. They were on a beach somewhere, sunburned and smiling, wind in her hair. They looked drunk on each other. Whole in a way I hadn't seen her since she came into my life. The second item was a note, just 3 lines. "I never meant to hurt you, either of you. I just want to do right by my child, whatever that means now." I didn't show it to her. I slipped it back into the envelope, placed it in the drawer beside our bed, and said nothing. The next morning, Emily found me sitting on the nursery floor. The walls were painted sage green. A mobile hung from the ceiling, a soft carousel of clouds and stars. I had built the crib myself, sanded every edge until it was smooth. I ran my hand along one of the rails, feeling for any flaw. Emily stood in the doorway, watching me. "What if it's not mine?" I asked her. She didn't answer. She just walked over and knelt down beside me, placing her hand on mine. "I don't know," she said. "But I know you've been here every single day, talking to him, preparing for him, loving him. You're already his father, in every way that counts." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But belief doesn't come easy when the truth is still out there, wrapped in an envelope, waiting to decide the shape of your life. We sat there in silence, both of us resting our hands on the crib rail, 2 people in limbo, hoping the storm would finally break. It came on a Thursday. The envelope was thinner than I expected, just a single page folded neatly, no fanfare, no warning. Just a plain white envelope slipped through our mailbox like it was any other piece of mail, like it wasn't carrying the answer to a question that had kept me up for nights, stripped our marriage bare, and turned me into someone I barely recognized in the mirror. I didn't open it right away. I stood by the front door, holding it in my hand, staring at my name typed neatly above the address. My palms were sweating. My heart was beating so loud it drowned out everything else. Emily walked into the hallway and stopped when she saw me. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. "Do you want me to—" she started, then stopped. Her voice was too soft, too fragile to carry the question all the way. I shook my head. "I'll do it," I said. We sat on the edge of the bed. The envelope trembled in my hands. I slid a finger beneath the seal and tore it open. I unfolded the paper slowly, careful not to rip it. There were only a few lines, a case number, a heading, and then probability of paternity. 0%. 0. A clean, cold number. So final, so cruel in its precision. I stared at it for a long time, as if maybe, if I blinked enough, the number would change. Emily didn't say anything. She leaned forward, trying to read my face before she looked at the page. When her eyes landed on the result, her breath caught. I heard it, the smallest gasp, and then nothing. It was the kind of silence that feels like someone screaming inside. I folded the paper back up and placed it on the nightstand. "So," I said, though my throat burned, "there's our answer." She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. Her hands came to her belly, instinctively, protectively. I watched her as if from a distance, like we were two actors in a scene neither of us auditioned for. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the word. I stood up. I needed to move. The room was shrinking around me. I walked to the window and stared out into the yard where the leaves had started to fall. Everything felt too still, too normal, like the world hadn't been tipped on its side just minutes ago. "You knew it was possible," I said. "You said you weren't sure, but you knew." She looked down, shame flooding her features. "I hoped." "That's not the same as not knowing." "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "I thought if I loved you enough, if I wanted it badly enough, maybe the universe would just give it to us." I laughed then, a bitter, quiet laugh that had nothing to do with humor. "Well," I said, "I guess the universe had other plans." She stood up slowly, her arms still cradling her belly. "He doesn't have anyone else," she said. "Jason he's not a bad man, but he's not ready. He's not the kind of father this child needs." "And what am I?" I asked. "Just the guy who was convenient enough to believe a lie?" "No," she said firmly. "You were the man I trusted, the man I wanted to build something real with. But you didn't trust me with the truth." She didn't answer that. There was nothing else to say. She sat back down on the bed. Her face crumpled, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. Openly, shamelessly, shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that only comes when the illusion finally dies. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I was grieving too, something no one else could see. A name I'd been whispering to an unborn child that didn't belong to me. A future I had drawn in my head, now smudged out like chalk on wet pavement. I wanted to hate her. But the truth was, I still loved her. And that made it worse. It was the middle of the night when she came into the living room. I was sleeping on the couch again, though sleep was a generous word for what I'd been doing lately, resting my body while my mind stayed wide awake. I had stopped trying to make sense of things. Now I just drifted in and out of numbness, like a boat lost in a fog I no longer cared to escape. She sat down on the edge of the couch without asking. "I want to tell you everything," she said. I didn't respond. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting for whatever part of me still had the strength to listen to speak up. She pulled her knees to her chest, as much as her belly would allow. Her robe was loose, her hair undone. There was no mask left, no makeup, no smile, just Emily, raw, unedited. "When Jason and I broke up," she began, "it wasn't clean, it wasn't mutual. I left." That surprised me. I'd always assumed he was the one who left her. "I left because he didn't know how to love anyone without owning them," she said. "It was beautiful at first. Intoxicating, really. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world who existed. Every second was poetry. Every touch was fire. And I mistook that intensity for love. She paused, watching my face. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. But over time, she continued, it changed. That kind of love, it doesn't burn forever. It starts to consume. Jealousy, suspicion, fights that ended in silence so thick I thought I'd choke in it. He never hit me, not once, but there are other ways to make someone disappear inside themselves. Her voice cracked, and she looked away. When I finally left, I was a wreck. I had no job, no home, no real sense of who I was outside of him. I crashed with a friend in New York, drank too much, slept too little. I hooked up with people I barely knew, sometimes didn't even like. I kept telling myself I was free, but really, I was just floating. Numb, detached. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her robe. And then, you came along. Finally, she looked me in the eyes. You were calm, stable, kind. You didn't want to consume me. You just wanted to sit next to me, to listen. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to perform to be loved. I didn't have to be Emily the muse or Emily the wild thing who makes men feel alive. I could just be me. A long silence stretched between us. I wanted to speak. I really did. But what could I say to that? I found out I was pregnant just a few weeks after we got serious, she said. I panicked. I told myself it had to be yours because the alternative meant dragging the chaos back into my life. I told myself I had a right to a fresh start. But that's not a fresh start, I said finally, my voice hoarse. That's just painting over the cracks and pretending the wall won't crumble. I know, she whispered, and I've hated myself for it every day. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. She let them fall. I wasn't trying to trap you, she said. I was trying to believe I could be someone worthy of you, someone whole. But you didn't trust me with the broken parts, I said quietly. No, she admitted, because I didn't think anyone could love me if they saw all of them. I sat up slowly. The cushions shifted beneath us. She looked small despite the life growing inside her, smaller than I'd ever seen her. Why now? I asked. Why tell me all of this now? Because I've lost you already, she said. There's nothing left to protect, only the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, let her words settle into the hollowness in my chest. I didn't hate her. That would have been easier, cleaner. But the truth was messier than that. I saw her, really saw her, for the first time that night. Not the version I had built up in my head, not the woman I wanted her to be, but the one who sat beside me now, bruised, imperfect, aching to be believed. And I didn't know if that was enough. I still don't. But I listened. And sometimes that's the only thing left to do when the story's finally being told. It had been 4 days since she told me the whole truth, and I hadn't said much since. We coexisted in silence, not the cold kind, not angry or bitter, just suspended. Like we were both afraid to breathe too deeply, in case it collapsed whatever fragile thing was still holding us together. I spent most of my time in the nursery. There was something sacred about that room, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Possibility, hope. The blank canvas of a life yet to be shaped. I'd sit in the rocking chair for hours, watching light shift across the walls. Sometimes I'd talk aloud, not knowing if I was speaking to myself, to the child, or to a version of my future I was still trying to believe in. And then, one morning, I woke up knowing what I had to do. It wasn't clarity, not the kind that comes with peace. It was something messier. A decision made not because it felt good or right, but because it felt true. I found Emily in the kitchen, standing barefoot by the sink. She hadn't heard me come in. She looked tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. "Em," I said. She turned. Her eyes were cautious, guarded. I don't blame her. I'd been shutting her out for days. I stepped closer. My hands were in my pockets so she wouldn't see how they shook. "I've been thinking," I said. She didn't speak. She just watched me like someone expecting a final blow. "I can't go back to how things were," I continued. "I can't unknow what I know. I can't pretend none of this happened." She nodded, barely, her lips pressed together. "But here's what I can do," I said. "I can choose what kind of man I want to be now." Her brows knit slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I may not be this child's biological father," I said, "but I've been here, I've built the crib, I've talked to him at night. I've imagined holding his hand on the first day of school, teaching him how to ride a bike, reading him the same book 5 times because he doesn't want to sleep." My throat tightened, but I kept going. "And maybe that doesn't make me his dad in some people's eyes, but it does in mine." Emily covered her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders trembled. "I don't want to be a placeholder," I said. "I don't want to live with a lie, so here's what I need from you. Complete honesty, always. No more omissions, no more hoping I don't ask the hard questions." She nodded through tears. "And in return," I said, "if you still want me, I'm here. Not because I'm obligated, not because I've forgiven everything yet, but because I want to be the man this child calls Dad." A sob escaped her before she could stop it. She reached for me instinctively, then paused, unsure if she still had permission. I closed the space between us. We stood there in the kitchen, holding each other like people who had been through a war and weren't sure who won. Maybe no one had. Maybe survival was the only prize. But her belly pressed against me, and I felt it, a gentle kick. A life, reminding us that something new was coming, whether we were ready or not. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Jason. I wasn't thinking about DNA or betrayal or the months of doubt behind us. I was thinking about the child who would need someone to show up every day, who wouldn't care about paternity tests, who would only know the hands that held him, the voice that read to him, the arms that caught him when he fell. I could be that voice, those hands, those arms, if she'd let me, if I could let myself. Time didn't heal everything. That was the first truth I had to learn. It didn't make the past disappear. It didn't stitch the trust back together exactly the way it was before. But it moved us forward, day by day, step by uneasy step. Emily and I didn't talk much about Jason after that. He called once more. She answered, told him everything was being taken care of, told him the child would be loved, protected, that if he wanted to be involved one day, that door wasn't locked, but it also wasn't wide open. He didn't fight it. Maybe he knew, in some quiet way, that love wasn't a matter of blood. Or maybe he just let go because letting go was the only thing he hadn't tried. Either way, we moved on. I was there for the rest of the doctor's appointments. I held her hand when the contractions came. I counted breaths with her when she panicked. I stayed awake through 2 full days in the hospital, watching machines beep and nurses come and go, and when the moment finally arrived, I watched him enter the world covered in blood and tears and screaming, like his lungs had been waiting for it. They placed him in Emily's arms first. Then she looked at me. And I knew. I didn't need her to ask. I didn't need permission. I stepped forward, and she passed him to me. He was so small, so light, so... His skin was wrinkled and warm, and he smelled like something ancient and brand new at the same time. I stared at him for what felt like hours. He opened his eyes once, just a flicker. But in that second, something inside me cracked open. I didn't know whose nose he had, or whether his hair would curl like mine. I didn't know if he would ever ask me why he didn't look like me, or whether I'd have the words when that time came. But I knew this. I loved him. Not in theory, not as a concept. I loved him in a way that made me want to protect him from everything sharp in the world, even the sharp edges in myself. The nurse asked if I wanted to fill out the birth certificate. I looked at Emily. She nodded. I wrote my name. Later that night, when the hospital had quieted down and Emily was finally asleep, I sat in the corner of the room holding him against my chest. His breathing was soft, steady. I thought about the man I had been before all of this, cautious, measured, afraid of things he couldn't define. And then I thought about who I was now, not healed, not whole, but present, capable of staying. That was the decision. Not one made once with a grand gesture, but one made every day in 100 small ways. Feeding, rocking, waking up at 3 a.m., soothing cries, holding him just because, choosing him again and again. That's what it meant to be a father. And maybe, just maybe, it's what it meant to be a man too. I left for Oregon the following week. Not in anger, not as a punishment, just a quiet exodus. A man stepping outside the life he'd almost lost to breathe for a while. I didn't tell many people. I packed a small bag, filled the car with gas, and drove until the road no longer looked familiar, until every tree and motel and gas station felt like someone else's story. I told Emily I'd be back. She didn't ask how long. She didn't beg me to stay. She just stood at the door with a hand on her belly, nodded once, and said, "Come back whole." She didn't say, "Come back to me." She didn't need to. I drove for hours with the windows down, letting the cold air sting my face. I played music too loud. I talked to no one. I stopped at cheap diners and sat in corners, writing in a notebook I bought at a gas station, trying to understand the weight of everything I was carrying. In that small town in Oregon, I rented a cabin with creaky floors and a fire that never really warmed the place. There was no internet. The silence was thicker there, cleaner, in a way that stripped me bare. I spent mornings walking along the river, afternoons writing, and nights staring at the ceiling asking myself the same question over and over. If love is built on trust, what happens when that trust breaks? But the love refuses to die? Some days I hated her. Some days I missed her so much it made my chest ache. Most days I lived somewhere in between, an ache and an emptiness wrestling over which one owned me more. But somewhere in that space, I started to see the difference between loving someone for who they are and loving who they make you feel like. I had spent so long being the man she needed that I'd forgotten to ask who I was underneath all that saving. And what I found, slowly, brutally, was that I did want this child even if he wasn't mine. Not just for her, not to fill a hole, but because something in me had shifted permanently the day I held him in my arms. A part of me had attached to him before I even knew how deep it would run. I wanted to be the man who stayed, even when it hurt, even when it wasn't perfect, especially then. I came back at the start of November. The leaves in our neighborhood had begun to fall, and the air smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. Emily was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned slowly when she heard the door. No dramatic tears, no sprint across the room. Just the kind of quiet reunion that happens between two people who've already lost and chosen each other anyway. I stepped forward. She didn't move at first, then finally reached for me. We held each other for a long time without words. Later that night, she showed me the baby's latest ultrasound photo. I stared at the grainy image like it was a secret only I could decode. "You still want this?" she asked. Her voice was quieter now, not unsure. Just soft, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it out loud. "I don't know what the hell I'm doing," I said. "But yes, I still want this." We didn't rebuild everything in a day. Some nights were cold, awkward. We stumbled over apologies, over what to name the baby, over who we were now that the story had cracked. But we tried, and trying, it turns out, is its own kind of vow. We painted the nursery again. A new shade, a new start. She asked me to read to her belly every night. I did. We went on walks together, slowly, our hands brushing, but not always linking. There was still distance, still unspoken questions, but there was also effort, there was presence. At night, when she couldn't sleep, she would whisper things like, "You don't have to stay forever, you know." And I'd whisper back, "I know, but I want to." Not because I had forgotten, not because it didn't still hurt, but because I had decided. And that choice, quiet, deliberate, made each day in the smallest of ways, that's what love had become for me. Not fireworks, not blind trust, but choosing her, choosing him, choosing myself, anyway, and that was enough.